Welcome. Today we're reading the chapter Whispers of Betrayal of the novel Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle. Last time, Tantor the elephant enjoyed a peaceful afternoon resting in the jungle with his friend Tarzan, unaware that hunters from the tribe El Harb were stalking nearby. When a shot was mistakenly fired by the hunters, Tantor panicked and fled, leaving a stunned Tarzan vulnerable to capture by the hunters. As the hunters realized who they had caught, they debated Tarzan's fate, ultimately deciding to take him to their sheikh, Ibn Jad, under the guise of seeking peace, while secretly plotting his demise.
Comrades of the wild darkness fell upon the menzil of Ibn Jad the sheikh. Beneath the small flitting tent where his captors had left him, Tarzan still struggled with the bonds that secured his wrists, but the tough camel leather withstood even the might of his giant thews. At times he lay listening to the night noises of the jungle, many of them noises that no other human ear could have heard, and always he interpreted each correctly. He knew when Numa passed and Sheeta the leopard, and then from afar and so faintly that it was but the shadow of a whisper, there came down the wind the trumpeting of a bull elephant. Without the bait of Ibn Jad Atasia, the sheikh's daughter loitered, and with her was Zayd. They stood very close to one another, and the man held the maiden's hands in his. "Tell me, Atasia," he said, "that you love no other than Zayd." "How many times must I tell you that?" whispered the girl. "And you do not love Fahd?" insisted the man. "Billah, no," she ejaculated. "Yet your father gives the impression that one day you will be Fahd." "My father wishes me to be of the harem of Fahd, but I mistrust the man, and I could not belong to one whom I neither loved nor trusted." "I too mistrust Fahd," said Zayd. "Listen, Ataja, I doubt his loyalty to thy father, and not his alone, but another whose name I durst not even whisper. Upon occasions I have seen them muttering together, when they thought that there were no others about." The girl nodded her head. "I know, it is not necessary even to whisper the name to me, and I hate him, even as I hate Fahd." "But he is of thine own kin," the youth reminded her. "What of that? Is he not also my father's brother? If that bond does not hold him loyal to Ibn Jad, who hath treated him well, why should I pretend loyalty for him? Nay, I think him a traitor to my father, but Ibn Jad seems blind to the fact. We are a long way from our own country, and if aught should befall the sheikh, Tolog, being next of blood, would assume the sheikhly duties and honors. I think he hath won Fahad's support by a promise to further his suit for me with Ibn Jad, for I have noticed that Tolog exerts himself to praise Fahad in the hearing of my father. And perhaps a division of the spoils of the Grazu upon the treasure city," suggested Zayd. "It is not unlikely," replied the girl. "And, Ullah, what was that?" The Bedouins seated about the coffee fire leaped to their feet. The black slaves, startled, peered out into the darkness from their rude shelters. Muskets were seized. Silence fell again upon the tense, listening menzil. The weird, uncanny cry that had unnerved them was not repeated. "Billah!" ejaculated Ibn Jad. It came from the midst of the menzil, and it was the voice of a beast, where there are only men and a few domestic animals. Could it have been? The speaker stopped as though fearful that the thing he would suggest might indeed be true. "But he is a man, and that was the voice of a beast," insisted Ibn Jad. "It could not have been he." "But he is a Nasrani," reminded Fahd. "Perhaps he has league with Shaitan." "And the sound came from the direction where he lies bound in a hedra," observed another. "Come," said Ibn Jad, "let us investigate." With muskets ready, the Arab, lighting the way with paper lanterns, approached the hedra where Tarzan lay. Fearfully the foremost looked within. "He is here," he reported. Tarzan, who was sitting in the center of the tent, surveyed the Arab somewhat contemptuously. Ibn Jad pressed forward. "You heard a cry?" he demanded of the ape-man. "Yes, I heard it. Camest thou, Sheikh Ibn Jad, to disturb my rest upon so trivial an errand, or camest thou to release me?" "What manner of cry was it? What did it signify?" asked Ibn Jad. Tarzan of the Apes smiled grimly. "It was but the call of a beast to one of his kind," he replied. "Does the noble Bedouin tremble thus always when he hears the voices of the jungle people?" "Gluck," growled Ibn Jad. "The Bedou fear naught. We thought the sound came from this hedra, and we hastened hither believing some jungle beast had crept within the menzil and attacked thee. Tomorrow it is the thought of Ibn Jad to release thee." "Why not tonight? My people fear thee. They would that when you are released you depart hence immediately." "I shall. I have no desire to remain in thy lice-infested menzil." "We could not send thee alone into the jungle at night where El Adrea is abroad hunting," protested the sheik. Tarzan of the Apes smiled again, one of his rare smiles. "Tarzan is more secure in his teeming jungle than are the Bedouin in their deserts," he replied. "The jungle night has no terrors for Tarzan." "Tomorrow," snapped the sheik, and then, motioning to his followers, he departed. Tarzan watched their paper lanterns bobbing across the camp to the sheik's bait, and then he stretched himself at full length and pressed an ear to the ground. When the inhabitants of the Arab Menzil heard the cry of the beast shatter the quiet of the new night, it aroused within their breasts a certain vague unrest, but otherwise it was meaningless to them. Yet there was one far off in the jungle who caught the call faintly and understood. A huge beast, the great grey dreadnought of the jungle, Tantor the elephant. Again he raised his trunk aloft and trumpeted loudly. His little eyes gleamed redly wicked as, a moment later, he swung off through the forest at a rapid trot. Slowly silence fell upon the menzil of Sheikh Ibn Jad as the Arab and their slaves sought their sleeping mats. Only the sheik and his brother sat smoking in the sheik's bait smoking and whispering in low tones. "Do not let the slaves see you slay the Nasrani, Tolog," cautioned Ibn Jad. "Attend to that yourself first in secrecy and in silence, then quietly arouse 2 of the slaves. Fejwan would be as good as another, as he has been among us since childhood and is loyal. He will do well for one." "Abbas is loyal too, and strong," suggested Tolog. "Yea, let him be the second," agreed Ibn Jad. "But it is well that they do not know how the Nasrani came to die. Tell them that you heard a noise in the direction of his hijra, and that when you had come to learn the nature of it you found him thus dead. You may trust to my discretion, brother," Tolog assured. "And warn them to secrecy," continued the sheik. "No man but we 4 must ever know of the death of the Nasrani, nor of his place of burial. In the morning we shall tell the others that he escaped during the night. Leave his cut bonds within the hijra as proof. You understand?" "By Allah, fully." "Good. Now go. The people sleep." The sheik rose and Tolog also. The former entered the apartment of his harem, and the latter moved silently through the darkness of the night in the direction of the hijra where his victim lay. Through the jungle came Tantor the elephant, and from his path fled gentle beasts and fierce. Even Numa the lion slunk growling to one side as the mighty pachyderm passed. Into the darkness of the hijra crept Tolog, the sheik's brother, but Tarzan, lying with an ear to the ground, had heard him approaching from the moment that he had left the bait of Ibn Jad. Tarzan heard other sounds as well, and as he interpreted these others, he interpreted the stealthy approach of Tolog, and was convinced when the footsteps turned into the tent where he lay convinced of the purpose of his visitor. For what purpose but the taking of his life would a Bedouin visit Tarzan at this hour of the night? As Tolog, groping in the dark, entered the tent, Tarzan sat erect, and again there smote upon the ears of the Bedouin the horrid cry that had disturbed the menzil earlier in the evening, but this time it arose in the very hijra in which Tolog stood. The Bedouin halted, aghast. "Ullah!" he cried, stepping back. "What beast is there? Nasrani, art thou being attacked?" Others in the camp were awakened, but none ventured forth to investigate. Tarzan smiled and remained silent. "Nasrani," repeated Tolog, but there was no reply. Cautiously, his knife ready in his hand, the Bedouin backed from the hijra. He listened but heard no sound from within. Running quickly to his own bait, he made a light in a paper lantern and hastened back to the hijra, and this time he carried his musket, and it was at full cock. Peering within, the lantern held above his head, Tolog saw the ape-man sitting upon the ground looking at him. There was no wild beast. Then the Bedouin understood. "Billah, it was thou, Nasrani, who made the fearful cries." "Bedoui, thou comest to kill the Nasrani, eh?" demanded Tarzan. From the jungle came the roar of a lion and the trumpeting of a bull elephant, but the boma was high and sharp with thorns, and there were guards and beast fire, so Tolog gave no thought to these familiar noises of the night. He did not answer Tarzan's question, but laid aside his musket and drew his husa, which after all was answer enough. In the dim light of the paper lantern, Tarzan watched these preparations. He saw the cruel expression upon the malevolent face. He saw the man approaching slowly, the knife ready in his hand. The man was almost upon him now, his eyes glittering in the faint light. To the ears of the ape-man came the sound of a commotion at the far edge of the menzil, followed by an Arab oath. Then Tolog launched a blow at Tarzan's breast. The prisoner swung his bound wrists upward and struck the Bedouin's knife arm away, and simultaneously he struggled to his knees. With an oath, Tolog struck again, and again Tarzan fended the blow, and this time he followed swiftly with a mighty sweep of his arms that struck the Bedouin upon the side of the head and sent him sprawling across the hijra. But Tolog was instantly up and at him again, this time with the ferocity of a maddened bull, yet at the same time with far greater cunning, for instead of attempting a direct frontal attack, Tolog leaped quickly around Tarzan to strike him from behind. In his effort to turn upon his knees that he might face his antagonist, the ape-man lost his balance, his feet being bound together, and fell prone at Tolog's mercy. A vicious smile bared the yellow teeth of the Bedouin. "Die, Nasrani," he cried, and then, "Billah, what was that?" As, of a sudden, the entire tent was snatched from above his head and hurled off into the night. He turned quickly, and a shriek of terror burst from his lips as he saw, red-eyed and angry, the giant form of Elfil towering above him. And in that very instant, a supple trunk encircled his body, and Tolog, the sheik's brother, was raised high aloft and hurled off into the darkness as the tent had been. For an instant, Tantor stood looking about, angrily, defiantly. Then he reached down and lifted Tarzan from the ground, raised him high above his head, wheeled about, and trotted rapidly across the menzil toward the jungle. A frightened sentry fired once and fled. The other sentry lay crushed and dead, where Tantor had hurled him when he entered the camp. An instant later, Tarzan and Tantor were swallowed by the jungle and the darkness. The menzil of Sheikh Ibn Jad was in an uproar. Armed men hastened hither and thither seeking the cause of the disturbance, looking for an attacking enemy. Some came to the spot where had stood the Hejra, where the Nasrani had been confined, but Hejra and Nasrani both had disappeared. Nearby, the bait of one of Ibn Jad's cronies lay flattened. Beneath it was screaming women and a cursing man. On top of it was Tolog, the sheik's brother, his mouth filled with vile Bedouin invective, whereas it should have contained only praises of Allah and thanksgiving, for Tolog was indeed a most fortunate man. Had he alighted elsewhere than upon the top of a sturdily pegged bait, he had doubtless been killed, or badly injured, when Tantor hurled him thus rudely aside. Ibn Jad, searching for information, arrived just as Tolog was extricating himself from the folds of the tent. "Billah!" cried the sheik. "What has come to pass? What, O brother, art thou doing upon the bait of Abd el-Aziz?" A slave came running to the sheik. "The Nasrani is gone, and he hath taken the Hejra with him," he cried. Ibn Jad turned to Tolog. "Canst thou not explain, brother?" he demanded. "Is the Nasrani truly departed?" "The Nasrani is indeed gone," replied Tolog. "He is in league with Shaitan, who came in the guise of El-Fil, and carried the Nasrani into the jungle, after throwing me upon the top of the bait of Abd el-Aziz, whom I still hear squealing and cursing beneath, as though it had been he who was attacked rather than I." Ibn Jad shook his head. Of course he knew that Tolog was a liar, that he always had known. Yet he could not understand how his brother had come to be upon the top of the bait of Abd el-Aziz. "What did the sentries see?" demanded the sheik. "Where were they?" "They were at their post," spoke up Matlog. "I was just there. One of them is dead. The other fired upon the intruder as it escaped." "And what said he of it?" demanded Ibn Jad. "Wella, he said that El-Fil came and entered the menzil, killing Yemeni and rushing to the Hejra, where the Nasrani lay bound, ripping it aside, throwing Tolog high into the air. Then he seized the prisoner and bore him off into the jungle, and as he passed him Hassan fired." "And missed," guessed Ibn Jad. For several moments the sheik stood in thought. Then he turned slowly toward his own bait. "Tomorrow early is the Rala," he said, and the word spread quickly that early upon the morrow they would break camp. Far into the forest, Tantor bore Tarzan until they had come to a small clearing well carpeted with grass, and here the elephant deposited his burden gently upon the ground and stood guard above. "In the morning," said Tarzan, "when Kudu the sun hunts again through the heavens and there is light by which to see, we shall discover what may be done about removing these bonds, Tantor. But for now let us sleep." Numa the lion, Dango the hyena, Sheeta the leopard passed near that night, and the scent of the helpless man-thing was strong in their nostrils. But when they saw who stood guard above Tarzan and heard the mutterings of the big bull, they passed on about their business while Tarzan of the apes slept. With the coming of dawn all was quickly astir in the menzil of Ibn Jad. Scarce was the meager breakfast eaten ere the bait of the sheik was taken down by his women, and at this signal the other houses of hair came tumbling to the ground, and within the hour the Arab were winding northward toward El-Habash. The Bedouins and their women were mounted upon the desert ponies that had survived the long journey from the north, while the slaves that they had brought with them from their own country marched afoot at the front and rear of the column in the capacity of askari, and these were armed with muskets. Their bearers were the natives that they had impressed into their service along the way. These carried the impedimenta of the camp and herded the goats and sheep along the trail. Zayd rode beside Atasia, the daughter of the sheik, and more often were his eyes upon her profile than upon the trail ahead. Fahad, who rode near Ibn Jad, cast an occasional angry glance in the direction of the two. Tolog the sheik's brother saw and grinned. "Zayd is a bolder suitor than thou, Fahad," he whispered to the young man. "He has whispered lies into her ears and she will have none of me," complained Fahad. "If the sheikh favoured thy suit though," suggested Tolog. "But he does not," snapped Fahad. "A word from you might aid. You promised it." "Well, yes, but my brother is an overindulgent sire," explained Tolog. "He doth not mislike you, Fahad, but rather he would have his bint happy, and so leaves the selection of her mate to her. "What is there to do then?" demanded Fahd. "If I were sheikh now," suggested Tolog, "but alas I am not." "If you were sheikh, what then?" "My niece would go to the man of my own choosing." "But you are not sheikh," Fahd reminded him. Tolog leaned close and whispered in Fahad's ear, "A suitor as bold as Zayd would find the way to make me sheikh." Fahd made no reply but only rode on in silence, his head bowed and his brows contracted in thought.
Did you enjoy today's chapter of Tarzan, Lord of the Jungle? Why not subscribe and ring the bell?